Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be cracking open Den of Thieves by James B. Stewart. It's a real page-turner about the crazy world of Wall Street in the 1980s. Ambition, greed, the thrill of getting away with it. Our mission today is to figure out how a small group of people gamed the whole system, the price they paid in the end, and the lessons we can all learn from this wild ride.
I think what makes this whole era so fascinating is the context. The 1980s were all about excess, like Gordon Gekko's famous "greed is good" speech from the movie Wall Street. It wasn't just some line in a movie. It was like the real mentality back then. And it wasn't just in finance either. Conspicuous consumption was in. It was all about getting ahead no matter what.
Yeah, it's like the decade itself was practically begging for a scandal like this to happen. So let's meet the main players in this whole drama. James B. Stewart introduces us to a cast of characters that would make any Hollywood movie jealous. We've got Ivan Boesky, the arbitrager. Basically, he made money from those tiny price differences in stocks, and he really took that greed is good thing to heart, which, well, we all know how that turned out for him.
Oh, yeah, talking about irony. But Esky's whole thing was getting rich through arbitrage. But that's what ended up taking him down when he crossed the line. He became the poster child for 80s excess. A real cautionary tale about how quickly ambition can go sour. But he wasn't the only one, of course. There was Michael Milken, the junk bond king. Now, this guy was a real innovator.
Right, junk bonds. For anyone who doesn't know, those are basically those high-risk, high-reward bonds. Really risky, but with the potential for huge payouts. Milken built his empire by using them to finance corporate takeovers. Totally changed the landscape of corporate finance.
Absolutely. He revolutionized how business was done. But he also blurred the line between being a genius and being greedy. Milken ended up using his power to get even richer, got involved in insider trading. It's like a classic case of brilliance mixed with some seriously unethical behavior. Makes you wonder, can you really have one without the other?
And then there's Siegel and Dennis Levine. They might not be as flashy as Boesky or Milken, but they were totally essential to making this whole scheme work. Siegel was an investment banker. He had access to all this secret info about upcoming mergers and acquisitions.
He would leak that information to Boesky, who then used it to make illegal trades. Buying stock in companies he knew were about to be bought out. Classic insider trading. Using information that's not public to get an edge in the market, it undermines the idea of a fair playing field for investors. And then there's Levine. He was a managing director at Drexel Burnham Lambert, Milken's firm.
Right, Levine did something similar. Used his position to get his hands on insider tips and share them. What's so interesting is how Stewart really shows that it wasn't just one bad guy. It was a whole network of people helping each other out. It's kind of disturbing story about how greed and ambition, the fear of missing out, how it can corrupt even the smartest people.
Yeah, and their methods kept getting more sophisticated. To avoid getting caught, they used offshore accounts, shell corporations. In these super complex financial tools, they thought they were untouchable, operating in this secret world where the rules didn't apply.
But as we'll see, that arrogance came back to bite them. They made one big mistake. They underestimated how determined the authorities were to stop them. Specifically, Rudy Giuliani, who was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Giuliani saw insider trading as a disease on Wall Street, and he was determined to cure it.
And that's when the story takes a really dramatic turn. Boesky was facing a mountain of evidence, so he decided to make a deal. He agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. This was a turning point in the whole investigation. His testimony blew everything wide open. He gave him all the details about how the insider trading ring worked, and he implicated Milken and others involved.
So stick around, because next time we'll dive into the fallout from this whole scandal. We'll see what happened to everyone involved and the lasting impact it had on Wall Street. Was it a wake-up call for real reform, or just a blip on the radar in a system driven by greed? We'll find out.
Yeah, Boesky flipping, that really changed everything. Gave Giuliani the ammo he needed to go after the big guys like Milken. His testimony really showed how this whole network worked, how they thought they could just play the system and get away with it.
It's like they made their own world with their own rules. But reality always catches up in the end, right? So what happened to these guys? What was the fallout when the hammer finally came down?
Well, it was pretty major. Boesky got sent to prison and hit with millions in fines. He became a total outcast on Wall Street. His name was basically synonymous with insider trading and all that 80s excess. Milken, after fighting it for a while, eventually pleaded guilty. Securities violations and all that.
Yeah, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist either, right? Milken got hit with like a massive $600 million fine and a 10-year prison sentence. It was a huge deal. really sent shockwaves through the whole financial world, showed that even the most powerful guys weren't above the law.
It was a landmark case, for
Mm.
sure, although Milken ended up only serving 2 years of that sentence. But the scandal went way beyond just these individuals. Drexel, Burnham Lambert, Milken's firm, basically imploded. It was a crazy fall from grace for a company that seemed untouchable.
So it wasn't just a few guys who got in trouble, the whole system took a hit. Makes you wonder if anything good came out of all this. Did it actually lead to some real reforms on Wall Street? Or was it back to business as usual once things calmed down?
That's something Stewart really grapples with in the book. The Den of Thieves scandal definitely exposed some weak points in the system. The lack of oversight, and the dangers of a culture that puts profit before everything else. The scandal did lead to some immediate changes, like tougher penalties for insider trading and more scrutiny from regulators.
It's almost like the authorities were playing catch-up. The schemes were so complex, and the culture was so ingrained, it took a scandal this big to force any real change.
I think that's a fair assessment. The big question, of course, is whether those changes were enough to actually stop this from happening again. Have we really learned our lesson? Or are we just going to make the same mistakes all over again?
Okay, let's take a step back from the case itself for a minute. What does Den of Thieves tell us about the bigger picture? The whole cultural landscape at the 1980s. We've talked about the whole greed is good mentality. But how did that actually play out in society as a whole?
Well, it's important to remember that this mindset wasn't limited to just Wall Street. You saw it everywhere, in movies and TV shows, even in politics. Think about the obsession with material things, with status symbols, the whole idea that individual achievement was everything. These were all signs of a culture obsessed with wealth and getting ahead.
It's wild how a book about a financial scandal can say so much about an entire era. Makes you wonder if these guys were just products of their time, or if they were just inherently corrupt.
Yeah, that's a debate that's still going on today. Were they just caught up in what everyone else was doing? Or did they make a conscious choice to break the rules?
Yeah.
Stewart doesn't give any easy answers. He paints a complicated picture of these guys, showing both their brilliance and their flaws.
And he makes a pretty convincing case that it wasn't just about a few bad apples. He sees the whole thing as a symptom of a system that rewarded greed and recklessness. It reminds us that our choices are always influenced by the world around us, and that systems can either encourage or discourage ethical behavior.
That's a crucial point. If we really want to prevent these kinds of scandals from happening again, we can't just focus on punishing individuals. We need to look at the systems and structures that allow this behavior to happen in the first place.
Right.
We need to ask ourselves, what incentives are we creating? What message are we sending about what's okay and what's not?
It's almost like a Greek tragedy, where ambition and hubris lead to downfall. But this isn't just an ancient story. The consequences here went way beyond just the main players.
Exactly. The Den of Thieves scandal had ripple effects. Throughout the financial world and beyond, it shook people's trust in the markets, raised questions about the government's role in regulation, and stark debates about the very nature of capitalism. These are all questions we're still grappling with today.
So as we head into the final part of our deep dive, I want to shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the listener. What are the key takeaways here? Why should this story about something that happened decades ago matter to someone listening in 2024? Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the drama and the big personalities, but we can't forget about the real victims here. Den of Thieves reminds us that insider trading, it's not some victimless crime. It really hurts regular people.
Absolutely. When Boesky, Milken, and all those guys were manipulating the stock prices, using information they weren't supposed to have, they were basically stealing from everyday people, people who didn't have access to that same information. They were rigging the game in their favor, making money at the expense of those who play by the rules.
It makes you wonder about the whole idea of a free market. When some people have such a huge advantage, it just erodes trust in the system, makes people less likely to invest in the first place.
That's a really important point. For a market to be healthy, it needs transparency, fairness. Insider trading throws all that out the window, creates a system where the well-connected, the guys willing to cheat, they can exploit everyone else, while everyone else is left wondering if the game is even fair.
So are we still feeling the effects of this scandal today? Did anything good actually come out of it?
Oh, the Den of Thieves scandal definitely changed Wall Street. It led to stricter rules, more enforcement, and a lot more awareness about how dangerous insider trading is. But it also made people question the whole culture of Wall Street, the role of greed and ambition, and the need for some ethical boundaries in a system that's often all about profit.
Like, regulations alone aren't enough, right? We
No.
need a real cultural shift where integrity and doing the right thing are just as important as making money.
Right. I think Den of Thieves is a warning. It reminds us that chasing wealth should never come before our values. It's a story about how seductive greed can be, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and how important it is to hold those in power accountable.
We've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive. As we wrap up, what's the one thing you really hope our listener takes away from Den of Thieves?
Hmm. I think the most important thing to remember is that we all have a part to play in building a more ethical, more just financial system. It doesn't matter if you're an investor, a business leader, or just a regular person. You have a voice and a responsibility to demand transparency, fairness, and accountability. We can't just assume the system will fix itself. We need to be actively involved in creating a world where integrity matters.
We can't just sit back and watch. We have to speak up, challenge the way things are, and hold those in power responsible for what they do. And this isn't just about Wall Street. These lessons apply everywhere. Any field, any organization where making money sometimes overshadows doing the right thing.
Den of Thieves really drives that point home. The past can teach us so much about the present and the future. It makes us think about the choices we make, the systems we build, and what kind of world we want to live in.
It's definitely a story that sticks with you. And that's what we aim for here on the Deep Dive, to make you curious, to get you thinking, and to leave you with something to ponder. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into something fascinating.